Hi, welcome to the Simple Nourished Living podcast. I'm Martha McKinnon, and this is my partner and my brother, Peter Morrison. Welcome, everybody.
Hello,
So,
everyone.
how are you?
Hi. I'm good. How are
I'm
you
doing
doing
I'm doing really
today?
well. So, what's going really well in your world right now?
Excellent. Well, I'm a little busy because I've been playing a lot of pickleball. I have a pickleball tournament
Oh,
tomorrow,
good
so
luck. Good luck.
playing with a new partner, so looking forward to it. Thank you very
Awesome.
much. Hopefully it's a nice day. It's supposed to be,
So, send us
so
pictures of your will you get a ribbon or a trophy or a
only if you
Well, you will
place, if
though.
you
Don't you
win
aren't you
first,
feeling you're
second, or
feeling confident,
third.
right?
Well, yeah, but we're playing up in a not up, but sort of, yeah, I guess we are playing ups in the
Okay.
divisions. It'll be very
All right.
challenging, so it'll
Okay,
be
good.
good.
Well, good luck.
And and I guess I wanted to mention to you that one of my favorite morning when I'm not intermittent
Mm-hmm.
fasting, if I am having something in the morning, it tends to be
Mm-hmm.
lighter and I tend to eat smoothies. And we were talking recently because I, for one, prefer like thicker smoothies. It's just fruit and nothing special,
Mm-hmm.
some fruit and cottage
Mm-hmm.
cheese, some
Mm-hmm.
spinach. And then, but then at the end, after it's already poured into my, it's a short, fat glass like a
Uh-huh.
bowl, but I like to add a little almond butter and then some pumpkin seeds, a little grape nuts for a little
Okay.
crunch, and a little muesli, or if I don't have muesli, just some rolled
Mm-hmm.
oats and maybe dates if I want that sort of texture. And then, but I do like to, and I would eat it with a spoon usually just because I don't know. I just sort of prefer that rather than gulping it out of a big cup. And you were telling me something recently about how that sort of aligns with something in Weight
Yeah, so
Watchers.
smoothie bowls. I think that's what we're describing. So on the Weight Watchers program, fruits and vegetables are 0 points unless you put them into a blender or food processor and drink them. So if you're drinking them, there's a place in the app where you'll check that it's you're drinking it, and then the points do count. And the reason behind that, I think, is that the science shows that when you're drinking, it's not as satisfying and nourishing. It is
Hmm.
satisfying to your system. It doesn't give that same satiety that it does when you're actually eating. And so, but so a wraparound for that, or a workaround, is to have a smoothie bowl, right? So if you're not drinking it and you're eating it with a spoon, then in my mind you'd be back to the zero, back to 0 points again. So that's just a consideration. Yeah. So you find it more satisfying,
Interesting.
like personally to just, yeah.
I do. I think I would eat it or I would drink it much quicker if it was in a, because I know I don't go to Jamba Juice,
Oh,
but
right.
there was a time when I used to go to Jamba Juice and there'd be this huge cup with a straw, and I would just you just would
Right.
suck it down and just inhale it and not really feel, and it's probably very
Oh, for
caloric.
sure. If you look at the points and calories on those,
Yeah,
yeah, tons.
but I wouldn't really feel like I even had a
Right.
meal
Right.
calorie
Right.
wise. But when I eat the smoothie with a spoon and it has a little more not substance, but it forces me to
Yep.
maybe chew a little and while
Right.
I'm eating, which I think is why I like adding the pepitas and the
Right.
muesli and grape
Mm-hmm.
nuts. But yeah, it slows me down. I can't inhale it, and I have to do some chew, and it's just
Yeah,
more
it's something about the
enjoyable,
satisfaction factor, right? I think. And
and it fills me up.
right. But it's interesting to think that if you
Yeah.
were drinking it, it wouldn't fill you up the same way as when you're eating it, right? So that's just
Hmm.
really, really
Hmm.
interesting. The whole fact that we're it's conflict the whole feeding ourselves optimally is complicated in some ways, right? That you gotta there's a lot to consider. That it's really not just a
Hmm.
calorie in, a calorie out because of, you know, because of so many things, because of our minds and our bodies and our emotions and the way that the nervous system works, right? And sending the signals from the stomach to the brain. And I mean, the physiology is just complicated in itself, right? Just with so many different systems and endocrine systems and hormones and the nervous system and the
Right.
digestive system. Yeah. So, but again, I think the key to all of this, you really tapped into the ultimate key is awareness, right? And paying attention and
Mm.
noticing. And once you pay attention and notice things, that's where all your power is. You can't really, if you didn't have that, if you hadn't noticed that and you just kept drinking the smoothie and you'd you'd be sort of lost.
Wondering why you
Yeah, you
weren't
just keep
losing,
doing,
you're not
right.
losing
You keep
weight.
doing what you were
Yeah.
doing and you'd be frustrated. But so it's just like slowing down, and it's getting those insights, getting those awarenesses. That's just part of the journey, part of life, and that's where the magic happens in the awareness. So
Mm.
anything we can do to help build that awareness, and that's I think that's where tracking comes in too. Is the point, if you think about tracking not as a punishment, or just this meaningless exercise, but as a way to really start to notice things that you didn't notice before. And that may even take a bigger paper journal. I took a course years ago where they really encourage you not to just track what you were eating, but like where you were eating it and who you were with and what you were feeling and how it made you feel after. And that can provide you like a whole bunch of information, right, that you might have been ignorant of in terms of what satisfies you, what doesn't, sort of what works and what doesn't, because everybody's so different. Which brings us to our topic today, which is there's really no one way to do Weight Watchers. Weight Watchers provides this platform. It provides a framework to help guide you in making different choices and seeing food differently and interacting with it differently. But nobody does Weight Watchers exactly the same. And I came to learn that came really home for me back when I was a leader for a short time in Weight Watchers Arizona, and we were at a meeting with it was just a group of meeting of leaders, and that topic came up. People were sharing like, when did Weight Watchers really start working for you? And people were sharing their approach, and everybody was doing the program differently. And what do I mean by that? So you can have vegetarians on Weight Watchers, and you can have people who are carnivores on Weight Watchers, and people who do all their cooking at home, and people who eat out regularly. I remember the story of a success story of a woman who was actually a food critic. So she had to be eating out all the, often. But
All
so,
the
but she,
time.
and she was successful on the plan. So many stories through the years of people. I remember, the woman who ran, I think it's long sold now, but Kathleen Tate from Tate's Bake Shop, where those cookies now are everywhere. But she started with
They're really
oh my
good
gosh, they're good
cookies.
cookies. But she started like selling, she was from somewhere in Long Island, and actually started selling cookies out of her family's like farm stand when she was a teenager, and ultimately had a successful bake shop. And there's a whole story. But at one point, I was remember reading an article of her, and there was a time when she was in a bake shop all day with long, stressful hours, and gained weight, and she became a Weight Watcher. So that's what's really, I think, exciting about the plan. There are people who eat, many small meals a day, and there are people who eat maybe one or two meals and do intermittent fasting. So the cool thing is that you don't have to just make yourself fit into a box. You can really just use the guidelines of the plan to help support you in what you're trying to accomplish, which I think is really a strength of the program, because so many of the other programs are just so extreme and so limiting. You have to do this, you have to do that, and so this is, I just think, a much more sustainable approach for the long term. I'm another big advocate of don't do anything to lose weight that you're not willing to keep doing, to keep the weight off. Because if you're going to have to do a lot of those same behaviors forever, to keep the
Mm.
to keep the weight off, to keep your fitness, whatever you're doing. Sort of like, don't do anything to get really fit, right? That you're not, you might train really hard, I guess, for a marathon or for something like that, and then back off a little bit. But the results,
But that's sort of doing what you do anyway, just in a little more
concentrated way for
concentrated
a time.
way.
Yeah. So
Right.
so it's like training is a little your training is a little different when you get preparing your everyday routine versus when you're training for an event. Which again, and a lot of us do, right? If we're having to if we're going to be in the one that comes up a lot for me that I've seen in a couple of the submissions of people who want a little help, and that they've given us ideas for topics for podcasts. I noticed a couple of times people say, I have events coming up. I need to, my grandkids are getting married. I've got an event, and we all do that, right? We're going to our reunion. We always want to be our best and maybe drop a few pounds, get a little fitter for those kinds of events. But in terms of day to day, lifestyle, you don't want to get too extreme for a short time because that can often rebound in a bad way. Have you ever done that where you were just really so extreme with yourself for a while that you couldn't keep it up?
Well, definitely if you're doing a special diet that requires special
Right,
food or special
right,
preparation or particular meals you need to eat in a particular order or anything like that, it sounds fun and well, it could sound fun. It could sound interesting and you think it's going to be
right,
helpful, but it usually backfires, I would say, at least for me personally, because it's not sustainable in the sense that it's not something, that's not how I'm going to live my
right,
life. So when I would stop that or slowly drift back into my way of doing
right,
things, invariably, if I did lose a couple pounds or whatever, I would sort of just end up back
right.
where I was,
So sort of like,
essentially.
one step forward, two steps back. If you get too aggressive with yourself, yeah, you really, I mean, the slow, steady, sustainable, step by step approach is the one that has been proven in the science. I mean, and I love to read in this space in terms of habits and behavior change. I've read several books, and it's consistent. The fact that
Hmm.
you got to take a slow, steady, sustainable approach. If you try to change too much too fast, you get overwhelmed and it backfires on you, just like you said. Yeah.
I think for me personally, my one exception to that rule would be intermittent
Mm-hmm.
fasting, which I sort of
Mm-hmm.
stumbled on. I had heard about it and I had probably read about it, and I know there are different theories about how best
Mm-hmm.
to do it, and there's different
Right.
time periods, but I've adapted over time to just sort of, I would say, listen to my body, and some days I fast longer,
Mm-hmm.
some days it's shorter, some days I don't fast at all, but there's no plan, there's nothing I'm following. I'm just sort of going by what I have going that day and also how I'm
Okay.
feeling.
Yeah. And fasting, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no,
So, and
no,
intermittent fasting
go
is
ahead.
something that you really introduced me to, and I was very, very hesitant about for lots of reasons that we probably could devote a whole podcast episode to. But I have found fasting helpful for myself as well, and this really relates. I woke up thinking about this morning because as I was going to bed last night, dinner was long over. I'd done some other chores, but suddenly I thought about those. I bought some really good they're biscotti from Costco. They actually are baked in Florence. We
Oh,
were just in Italy this summer. Oh my gosh!
really?
So I started to see those biscotti and think, wow, one of those would really taste good. But then I thought, No, as when you think in terms of fasting and your window, right, of eating and the fact, well, my kitchen, I'm thinking, well, my kitchen's been closed now. I haven't eaten in a couple of hours. If I have that cookie, now I'm going to have to reset the clock, right? And it's going to be later tomorrow before I can will really feel good about eating again. So I really had that awareness that the intermittent fasting helps me avoid the late night snacking that's really, I didn't need anything. I wasn't hungry. It was just a passing thought. But because I do fast, because I
Mm-hmm.
do want to have, and again, like you, I'm not strict. I use my body as a guide, but for health reasons too. I mean, there's been a lot of science about all of the benefits that you get beyond just weight, right, in terms of health. So, I typically probably do 12 to 14 to 16 hours more, but probably 12 to 14. But it was enough, again, because we just had an episode where we are talking about nighttime cravings. And for me, just knowing that I want to eat, I don't want to have to wait till like 6 o'clock tomorrow night to eat is enough to have me say, nah, I don't, yeah, it was a passing thought, but no, I'd rather just stick with and you know, keep that window going. So,
It makes me think of something you mentioned in a previous podcast about your
right,
Duolingo streak and keeping the streak going. It's sort of the
right,
same thought process of you want to keep the streak going,
right.
you want to
It's really helpful. So I think it
not
can be helpful
restart
for
your
people,
clock.
especially if you're a real mindless muncher, I mean, this whole concept of, and I think there's a lot of, and again, we're not scientists by any stretch. We're not doctors. We're just two people sharing our experiences. This is all very anecdotal. But there's just something, how do I describe? I mean, I think it's just I don't know. For me, it's been surprisingly helpful in a lot of ways that I didn't even anticipate. Especially if you're used to this mindless snacking. I think it's good for your digestion. I used to be the one who just would, you know, even if I wasn't hungry, if you're out somewhere and the carrots are there, I mean, it's just you're eating because it's there. You don't really need it. And I think your body does. I think digestion, all of this works better if I don't think your body wants to be digesting food constantly, If you think about
Hmm.
from an evolutionary standpoint, again, this whole concept of feast and famine, where sometimes you would eat and then there'd be periods where you wouldn't. I think I have a feeling like my body works a lot better if it just has times to rest, and not be constantly, you know, digesting just because you're eating it just because you see it. So the that's
Hmm.
what other words for intermittent fasting that have become popular, like time restricted eating. The fact that you're just limiting
Hmm.
the hours that you eat, I think can be another just good something to consider. Just another guardrail, just another way of uh, evaluating your relationship with food that can be helpful.
And I think it is one of those controversial approaches that because you've written a few posts on Simple
Hmm.
Nourished Living about intermittent fasting, and it's received some much support, but
Yeah.
also much
Right. Right.
opposition, I guess, to people just don't think, and that's back to your point of there is no one way to manage your weight to do Weight
Right.
Watchers.
And I think just to stay open. I mean, I'm having to remind I mean, I think we teach and we talk about what we need to know and what we need to learn. I, it's we can become know-it-alls. I know I can. I think I
Hmm.
know. I think I have the answers based on and I have a really good teacher in my space who's constantly reminding me, like, you're 1/8 billion. You really don't know diddly squat. Your opinion is sort of meaningless. And I think that that's important to keep remembering, to always stay open, to always learn, because I can get really caught up in the way, my limited view. And my limited worldview is very small. It's like one person. So so my first reaction to you was intermittent fasting. Oh my goodness. But then I opened myself up to it. and I experimented for myself. And I think the best thing you can do is just not take anybody's word for anything, right? But to try it for yourself and give it a chance and see. And then you know, I mean, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. Maybe some variation of it works. Maybe it
Mm-hmm.
works on certain days of the week. You know, maybe it works in
Mm-hmm.
certain situations. I know, for example, traveling. I think that intermittent fasting, if that's the way that you're sort of managing your life, it can take a lot of the pressure off when you're traveling and you're in different countries and you're eating different foods and you have less control over what you're going to eat, right? But you have more control over the time frames in which you will eat. And I think about a lot of cultures, like I was very into studying, like French ladies don't get fat, and they have a lot of very strict food rules. I mean, when you're in Paris and if you miss the lunch hour, the restaurants close, you know? So while they might not call it intermittent fasting, they're not eating, 24/7. There's a breakfast time, there's a lunch time, there's a dinner time, and there's not a lot of snacking in that culture. So yeah, so there's all different ways to approach this. And I think if you get, again, this goes back to your mindset and your openness and your attitude and how you're feeling. If you really are approaching it with curiosity and interest, and not overwhelm, it can become fun to just see it as an experiment, and to play and say, well, I don't have to do this forever, but I can try it and see what happens. And that's when I think the whole journey becomes, much less overwhelming. You just take it little bit step by step and, make it playful, make it fun.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. It's funny. I mean, I'm just going to throw one more thing out here. I read too much, I think, but I'm a big fan of James Clear, the writer of Atomic Habits. And I am playing just little bits with his app. I haven't quite mastered it yet, but I was doing a little bit of reading, and he said that and he's really become an expert in understanding habit change, right? Because he's read tons, and that's really his space. But he was talking about habit change, and he said that there are four things you have to consider, or questions you should be asking yourself when you're trying to develop a new habit or break an old habit. Actually, it was when you're trying to build a new habit. He said, ask yourself, how can I make this obvious? How can I make what my new habit easy? How can I make it attractive? And how can I make it satisfying? So all those things are very positive, right? In terms of how can I introduce this into my life? So for example, me, if I'm wanting to do more yoga, I will often just leave my yoga mat unrolled in my bedroom. So
Mm-hmm.
it's now obvious, right? It's like, oh, and I don't have to get on it for a long time, but oh, I should do a couple yoga stretches. I could do a few down dogs. I have a few minutes. So when you start thinking about that, how can I make this obvious? How can I make it easy? How can I make it? So how can I make? It's like we're really talking about taking the stress out of it, right? Making it more fun. Kind of off topic, but
Well, no, but that makes me think something we've talked about in the past, and something a lot of people write in about is making meals easier,
right,
meal preparation easier. And well, there's a lot more prepared foods in the
mm-hmm,
supermarkets these days. Or how do you repurpose your leftovers? And if you cut your veggies up, or you cook a big batch of veggies and you put them in your container in the fridge, you have a multitude of ingredients ready to go that aren't in any one dish, but you've got some leftover rotisserie
right.
chicken, and you could easily put together a meal just by assembling a few ingredients. You don't have to start from scratch every time.
That's a great
So
point. I
that
mean, because a
made
lot of us do struggle with the feeding of ourselves, and this is a great way if we start thinking about that in terms of our cooking or approach to eating. It's absolutely spot on. We want to make it like obvious. I found that to be true too because I
obvious.
got myself a new air fryer for Christmas, and it's like sitting right on the counter, and like
Hmm.
so now it's obvious. Like if I had to go pull it out of the pantry or pull it out of a cupboard, but I'm using it because it's right there. So if you really start to think about how to set up your life, if you want to eat more fruit, like have the fruit bowl right on the counter, right? It's obvious. If you So this is another great exploration that we could really apply to what we're trying to help people accomplish here, you know, around making healthier eating easier and more fun.
And what were the four tips
So
again? Obvious,
obvious,
easy,
obvious, easy,
easy.
attractive, and satisfying.
Mm.
So we'll keep playing with that because that's really sort of the foundation. I mean, from which he builds. There's a lot more around habit change, but I think the more we understand about human behavior and habit change and how to make this easy on ourselves, it doesn't. I mean, and again, this goes back to my whole mindless eating thing. That those shifts really were so helpful, and it was so easy. You just and it's obvious and easy. And so, yeah, this is something we'll definitely want to be exploring more as we continue these sessions.
And just remember, there is no
There's no
right
right
way.
way.
There is
There's no
only the way that
right.
works
There's
for
no right
you.
way. There's no one way. There's the way that works for you. And so you want to tailor the program for you. You don't want to try to force yourself into a program that doesn't work. All right.
Very helpful. Thank you.
We'll see you soon.
Have a
Bye
great day,
bye.
everyone. Bye.